Good afternoon. This is Senate Government Operations Committee meeting. It's March 31st. And I would just remind folks that we don't use the chat when we have our committee meetings in deference to our chair who's not with us today. We're also way behind schedule. Actually, she will be here soon. We are way behind schedule because of technical glitches on the Senate floor. So we have changed around our schedule a little bit. We're going to move ahead with looking at a couple of bills. We're actually waiting for our witnesses to arrive as well. So until that time, maybe the thing to do would be to have Tucker talk a little bit about the amendment to H 337 so that we're all on the same page when the witnesses get here. Is that okay, Tucker?
That is okay. The amendment to H 337 is posted on the committee's information page. It adds one clause to one section of the bill to clarify the authority of the state librarian to sell additional copies of the Vermont statutes annotated. So section 6 amends 22 VSA section 611, excuse me, adds that section. And if you go down to subsection D, in the underlying bill, it states that additional copies may be sold to parties identified in this section at a price to be fixed by the state librarian. This exists in current law in Title 29, so the state librarian currently has this authority. However, it was brought to my attention that this may present a direct conflict with some of the publishing contracts that are used, for example, for the Vermont statutes annotated. So to rectify any potential conflicts, the amendment adds a clause to the end of this subsection that would state that those additional copies may be sold at a price to be fixed by the state librarian, provided that the sale is permitted by the publishing contract. Now, there may be multiple contracts related to the publication of the Vermont statutes annotated and the acts and resolves. I will highlight for you that the acts and resolves are published through the authority of the Secretary of State's office, not the state librarian. So when the witnesses arrive, one of the things that you may want to ask about is how many publishing contracts does the state librarian deal with? And what would the limitations be on resale? One thing we know for certain is that for our purposes, resale of the Vermont statutes annotated that are allotted through the General Assembly's contract with LexisNexis is prohibited. So that is where this clause comes in. And that's all that is there. Happy to answer any questions.
But we know that it's what you're talking about doing is prohibited by the major contractor, right?
That is correct.
Right.
By the publisher. By the publisher.
By the publisher.
Senator Collimore?
Thank you, Senator Polino. So Tucker, I'm not clear. I'm trying to read through it. Are you saying that we need to do this because of what is in this bill, or is it already on the books that they can't resell, and this would be needed to be done regardless?
It needs to be done in this particular bill and to correct current statute. So current law says that the state librarian is authorized to sell additional copies of the Vermont statutes annotated. That already exists. That presents a problem in current law and with this bill that you're trying to correct.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Well, I'm all for it. I mean, it's not particularly controversial.
Allison, you had said you had an update for us about something.
I do. I have an updated thanks to Tom, who sadly is not here. Our witnesses were important to both pieces of this conversation. My update from the law school, and actually through Tom, is that the law school is provided a free full set of the Vermont statutes annotated every time they're fully, updated. And it was great because that clarified for the new librarian as well. So that was good.
Did your job.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, and I think although obviously people change in their positions, but Senator White did indicate that Senator Ballant did not want the copies. But obviously she's going to be there for who knows how long. At some point, there'll be somebody else there. So I don't know that we need to make a decision based on her.
On her, right? Yeah, because it says President Pro Tem, it doesn't say who the President Pro Tem is.
So
Just
the nice thing about the Pro Tem is that they can just whip over. Oh, there's Tom. They can just whip over to like Health and Welfare, which is close by, that has a full set. So I mean, there's never a copy too far away, and there's always something close by.
No, I was just trying to point out, if the Speaker of the House is included, I always consider them to be equal kind of people, the Senate Pro Tem and the Speaker. So
yeah, you're right.
Tucker?
I think that in the original statutes, the match between the Speaker in the House and the officer in the Senate was the Lieutenant Governor as the presiding officer of the chamber. That's why you have the Lieutenant Governor specified basically right next to the Speaker of the House in the underlying statute.
So
well, that clears that up.
Even more important, I think, I agree with Brian, the President Pro Tem needs parity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that as well.
But I also understand what Tucker said, because those are the presiding officers of each chamber, the
True.
Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker. So you're right, that's probably why it was in there originally.
And I wonder if those are the copies, Brian, that we get in the chamber. I wonder if those are the Lieutenant Governor's copies.
Tom, are we expecting Jason as well?
I know that Jason was possibly going to be a little late to this, although we're starting late. So
Right.
if we'd like to go ahead and get started, I can answer any questions on behalf of, there he is.
Oh, there he is. All right, Senator Clarkson, and then we'll get started with the amendment.
Before you two joined us, we actually had a moment and I updated them on the law school. So Tom, thank you for your information. And I think Jane, the librarian, was really grateful to know, because she didn't know she got them for free. So that was great.
That's fantastic.
And then we went through the amendment.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you folks are okay with the amendment. I don't know, I assume you had time to look at it and have some thoughts about it, either Jason or Tom.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the amendment. I don't think it substantially impacts anything.
Jason? Jason frozen, or is he just looking up like that?
I
There
think
he
he's
is.
reading the amendment.
He might know he's not on, he's muted.
You're muted for what it's worth.
Jason, we can't hear you.
Yeah, he's still muted. I think the only impact that this would have maybe on contracting that the Secretary of State does with LexisNexis or whatever vendor actually fulfills this contract. So that could be something to consider in their next contract. I think one thing that this does do, all these changes, is actually clarifies what exactly we're allowed to charge for and what we're not. So as written, my understanding of it is that by request, those people can receive one copy, but if they request an additional copy, we could charge, there you are, within
Very
state
good.
government.
I hear you.
Can you hear us,
Are we
Jason?
hearing everyone?
Working.
Yep.
I
It
love
doesn't
tech.
look like you're muted. Oh, now you've remuted yourself.
Hmm.
Great, there you
I
are.
don't hear anything.
We hear you.
It could be his headphones.
It's quite a
Jason,
day for technology.
try talking to us, because you look like you're unmuted to us.
It is. Now I can hear you. I had to like do some different items, but I'm not just talking through my computer. So
Now we
hopefully you
hear you
can hear
loud
me.
and clear. Does everybody
Perfect.
hear him?
Perfect.
Senator Clarkson?
So, Jason, we had a question for you, which is, we have many questions for you, but one of them is when these, the Vermont statutes annotated are sold to all the law firms around Vermont, are they sold at this modest $5 a volume, or are they sold at market rate?
No, they are sold at $5 a booklet.
Wow.
Yes, it is quite a deal for the law firms and a few other entities to obtain them.
And who sets the price?
The state librarian. Up until this point, I had not decided to change, but Tom McMurdo and myself were discussing that this year, and we felt that we do need to kind of update this amount because it is below market value.
Sure.
And LexisNexis is okay with you setting the price? They don't set the price?
No, they do not. They sell the books by themselves. If someone wanted to go to them, it is about almost $1,000. It's like $987 for the complete set.
Wow.
And they don't allow you to sell to others, correct?
Correct. Just more or less internally to just these few people, and it's the excess basically that we have.
So
the amendment we're talking about would say that, you know, you can only sell them to others if provided that the sale is permitted by the publishing contract. So LexisNexis would not permit you to, or at least as of yet, are not permitting you to do that. Are there other people other companies you contract with?
No, that's the weird part for us. We don't have a contract whatsoever, but everybody else has a contract. Ledge Counsel, Secretary of State, there are a whole bunch of other entities. Even the DMV has a contract because they get to do their things digitally, virtually online. So when I saw that it is pursuant to a contract, I was a bit more concerned because there are many contracts that would now probably stop us from doing any of this. While that might not be a full problem, we definitely would be losing any funds out of our budget to do this now work, plus the manpower that's there. We're never going to recoup, in a sense, what we actually do, but we do charge enough to kind of, you know, get them out the door a little bit as we can. But if we are, in a sense, that would be a different direction for us.
So why
Just
would
makes
we
the
do this?
What? Say that, Allison?
So why would we do this?
That's what I was just going to ask. Is what's the point of the amendment?
Great minds thinking alike.
Well, here is where I think, because we were trying to get everything cleared up and in working with Ledge Counsel, that it doesn't impact their work, because the contract is coming, I think, from Michael Turnick, is who oversees it.
Tucker?
So these concerns were actually raised by Becky Wasserman and Michael Chernick. Becky Wasserman is the contracting attorney for Legislative Counsel. And when she reviewed the bill, she raised the issue that the contract that we have with LexisNexis, which according to the terms of the contract would also cover the state librarian's issuance of these copies, states expressly that we are not permitted to resell volumes that are allotted to us. So that was the issue that was raised, is that we would be violating our contract if we were to further permit the resale of these additional copies. Now, there could be contract negotiations in the future to allow for this resale to happen, but under the current terms, it's prohibited, and it has been prohibited since the contracts were entered in 2001.
Tom?
It's my understanding that when Sybil McShane was the state librarian, she began the policy of charging for these materials. So that would be, I want to say, sometime between 2006 and 2008. So it's good to now understand that that was in violation of the existing contract. So having this level of clarity with this is great, because first of all, we're not recouping, as Jason was saying, we're not recouping our costs in terms of labor by offering these outside of state government. My guess is that, and this is a guess, so don't hold me to it, is that under the stipulation in this that we were sending copies to the bar, that bar members could also acquire copies through that. But if that's expressly prohibited by the contract and was at the time, I think that this puts us in a historically not great position. But again, this cleanup puts us in position to essentially right that. So in that respect, I'm all in favor of the amendment, just from our business side, that it would help clarify exactly who we're allowed to sell these to, which it sounds like is no one.
Correct. That's what I'm starting to hear, which changes the entire dynamic, which would mean one of two things, I guess, for the committee to consider, but maybe that's different legislation. Do you wish for us to give them to those respective parties, or hold them and then at the end of the year, destroy them as needed? Because those are the two options that I see. It will be giving persons associated access to them by just giving, or we will reserve it, hold it for a period of time, and then recycle as needed until new changes appear.
So for clarification, I'm sorry to hop in.
No, go ahead, Tom.
I believe that the purpose of this is going back to 1890 or whenever it was originally conceived, was to provide the statutes to state government so that people who were making the laws had the laws in their hands. And so any sales that were going on outside of state government seem kind of a little bit outside of the purpose of this. Tucker, feel free to correct me here in a minute, but it seems like that this kind of brings us back to the actual purpose of this, which is to provide these volumes to members of state government. So the question that I have is, if someone on this list who's in the by request group requests a second copy, are we allowed to charge them within state government? Because we do now. Or do we simply just send them the second copy until we run out of copies?
That is not clear to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know the answer. Allison, Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, so, or do we renegotiate the contract? You know, I'm married to a lawyer, married to, you know, that you can just renegotiate the contract too. Is the purpose of this also driving all those other sales so that the sales to law firms and stuff will just be direct from LexisNexis at $9.87 a set? Or is that the purpose of this? Or you know, I don't think they'd want to have their work destroyed. You want to see it used. So that seems stupid. And we're Vermonters and we hate to do that. You know, waste is against our nature. So,
well, recycling and burning books is not, or it's not in our nature either.
Right. Well, recycling's in our nature.
Right. Sure.
But not burning books. So, it strikes me that A, we could renegotiate the contract, and B, it's helpful to have this clarity on it's identifying a problem we either need to solve or live with. It strikes me.
Tom, I know you had your hand up. Senator Rahm had her hand up as well. I'm not sure whether you were going to directly respond to Senator Clarkson. Tom?
If I have a question for Tom too, so he could respond
Okay.
at the same time, but how often do we run out of these books?
It's unusual for us to run out of the VSA or the pocket parts. We almost always end up destroying some, usually triple digit numbers of those volumes. And by destroying, I mean recycling. We do have to actually rip the covers off, which is labor intensive. So that's another, there's a lot of hidden costs in here for us in terms of labor, arranging to get these, shipping them out, all those sorts of things to people in state government. So,
can I just clarify, you said in the triple digits, you are destroying them?
Yeah, it's usually closer to 100, but sometimes can be a couple hundred, 300, rarely. But Yeah, I didn't become a librarian to destroy books, but it is part of the job. So does that answer your question?
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just feel like we ended up with more questions than we started with.
right. I don't. Why are we putting so many?
I think there's actually some nice clarity happening here, which is
Okay.
for me.
It does for us. I know that. Right. As Tom said that. I was like, oh, I had a question about this when I saw the change. I went, now what would cause us to be out of contract? And now we are starting to kind of know, which helps us, but it might not help some other people down the road.
No, I mean,
Senator Clarkson.
sorry, I have another question. So Tucker, how often is this contract renegotiated with LexisNexis?
I do not know the answer to that.
But Becky
My
would.
apologies, but Becky would, and I can get that answer for you.
Yeah, because it strikes me that, well, if we want to, I mean, to go back to the earlier thing I said, is that this either provides clarity and we live within it, or we decide we need it and we raise the price, as Jason was suggesting before, and actually break even. I mean, is it a moneymaker or a break even? Is it something that actually is beneficial for the libraries to oversee and manage, or is it something that we want to renegotiate anyway?
Well, I want to
Drifted
not
my
back
thought.
up, but I want to sort of back up, take a breather in a sense. And we have a couple of questions. One is whether or not we support this amendment, which it seems like I don't want to speak for everybody, but it seems like we do support the amendment. Then the other question is, if so, are there other unanswered questions that we need to resolve before we really vote on this bill?
Right.
Like a thing about the cost of this price that's charged when the books are sold, and what are those things that we need to really grapple with now, or are they just something that we need to be, sort of spotlight on and work on some other day? We need to resolve those questions before we move on with this bill.
I leave that to Tucker to kind of answer that along with the chair, because it's going to be quite interesting. We are in support of the bill, but it definitely will allow us, though, to stop for a moment and look at what we might need to do, because we could stop charging completely and retool some things. If people start to request more than one, and who does that, we will be kind of keeping track. Because we did not need to necessarily do that before.
Senator White, you had your hand up.
Yeah, what is the, I apologize for not being here, but what is the question about the contract?
It's yours, Tucker.
Sure. So there is a potential conflict between the contract for the publishing of the Vermont Statutes Annotated and what the state librarian is permitted to do under current law in Title 29 and here. And the conflict is that the contract states expressly that the VSAs are not to be resold by the state entities that are receiving them.
And the state entities that are receiving them is the library, or is it the the clerk's office and the committee rooms because those are the state entities that are receiving them.
The state librarian is covered by those contract terms, and here is acting as an agent that is selling the VSA potentially under that subsection D. So the amendment would allow them to continue the practice of selling the VSA if the contract says that they can do that. And the discussion since the time that the amendment structure was brought up has been, well, can the contract be renegotiated to clarify for the state librarian to whom they may sell copies of the Vermont Statutes Annotated? And if you would like clarity about the contract contents, you should bring in Becky Wasserman so that she can walk you through what the contract requires, who is covered by it, and what the consequences might be for violating the contract. But in general, these resale provisions are put in a contract to prevent the state from becoming a low-cost enterprise in competition with the publishing agent. So I think you've heard testimony that these volumes are sold at less than market price. If I am in the private market acting as the publisher, that sounds a bit nightmarish to try to battle with.
Is this can I ask if this contract is negotiated by our contract queen? Is this through BGS?
Through Becky.
This
Well,
is
Becky
contracted
doesn't-
through Becky Wasserman.
She
handles the
negotiates the
contracting.
contract?
I believe so, on behalf of Ledge Council.
And I've
You
asked
should
when-
bring in Becky to get clarity on all of this.
Oh, okay, on behalf of Ledge Council, as opposed to the BGS. Because they do all our other contracts.
Right.
But
Tom
Becky,
has had his hand up. I wonder if Tom wants, Tom, do you want to add something now?
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that this bill covers not just VSA, but session laws, directories. I think there's a couple other things that we distribute that are
Action
covered.
resolves.
Acts and resolves, yeah.
Mhm.
So we do resell some of those. And to my knowledge that, well, for what it's worth, that those are not in violation of any contractual agreement. Because those are actually paid for by the state to LexisNexis. So within that, I think that there is the provision. That's where this provision for the state librarian to be able to set the price would actually still be in effect. And with this amendment, again, I think this comes back to the contract negotiation. So.
Senator Clarkson?
while we're thinking of all that, I'm just puzzled by the fact that acts and resolves. I mean, acts and resolves, as far as I remember, was something that was just published by us and that they could just run off a copy of it once it was edited and finished. I've never seen a properly bound copy of it. Does LexisNexis really produce that? Because we've never gotten a copy of that.
They do. If I can, if our conversation goes further enough, I might run up and get a specific item that I've received from LexisNexis that talks about all the Vermont products that it actually creates and what they charge for it. I have that on hand because I was stunned when I saw that the whole set of VSAs might be $1,000. I remember seeing that, like, oh,
Yeah. $987. Wow. But also, you know, quite honestly, I would buy a copy of the Acts and Resolve because it would be great to have. I mean, in some ways, that's like the most important thing we get is, other than the laws themselves, is what we actually accomplished and what got signed into
Right.
law.
Puts it in plain English. It actually puts in plain English the things that we've
And it
actually
does those
done.
great summaries, and it's so much more useful. And it's now only online. So anyway, that's never even been offered to us. I didn't know that existed.
Senator White.
Isn't that what at the end of the session we get we get a form and it says, do you want a copy of the Acts and Resolves from this session?
No, we have not gotten that for a long, long time because it's now published online. So it takes them a while to edit. We don't usually get it till July or August. And as far as I know now, it's only available online, and you have to ask specifically to have it printed out. And I just thought that I've seen it. I mean, Janet, I used to request it of Janet, and when she was in Ledge Council, and it's now a pain to get a copy.
Huh, I didn't know that. I thought
You
thought
can
every
always buy one
spring
from
I
LexisNexis.
thought every spring I sign a thing that says I don't want it.
I just want us to think for a minute about our timing, because this has been a weird schedule today. It seems like we could have this conversation for a while. I'm not saying we shouldn't have it for a while. On the other hand, we could come back to this conversation with Becky Wasserman at another time and maybe get more clarity so we all know what we're talking about, which would mean if we put this aside for now, then we could move on to H-154, assuming that witnesses are here for 154. Gail, do you know if the witnesses are here?
Mr. Chair, the Representative Wachowski is on she's in the House, and I guess they're going to take a roll call. So I've asked her to join us after the roll call.
Can I make a comment
Senator
about
White,
that?
Senator White, you can become chair of this meeting if you like.
Well, I have actually am not sure that we always need to have the reporters of the bills come and speak
Well,
to
that's
us.
true.
I mean, I thought it was very awkward yesterday when Representative Lefevre was here and Tucker really walked us through the bill. And
Sure.
so she would have walked us through the bill first, and then Tucker would have walked us through the bill. So I'm not sure that it's actually necessary. And if we do have somebody come, it should be to just kind of lay the groundwork for us about why they did it.
Right. Just give a broad overview of what the intent was and how it went on the floor, that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's what I do. That's what I did this morning on S79 and House General. I just gave the big story.
I know, but that isn't the way House members usually do it. I mean, if you remember when Hal Colson came, he kind of went through the sections of the bill, and we don't. So anyway,
okay, that's good to know, Chairwoman, because my understanding was when we were talking about the agenda a few weeks ago, that anytime anything came from the House, we would ask the reporter. So if you want to just stipulate it, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that is kind of what happens, but I'm not sure it's necessary.
Okay.
No, just say a couple things.
Yeah.
So
Keisha.
Number one, it's Representative Vyhovsky. I just want to help her out here in her absence. Two, she didn't really realize until today she was even supposed to come. So I don't think she has very much ego or concern in whether or not she's ultimately invited. But I do think, I mean, the way I've always felt, having been in the House and now being in the Senate, is it's still valuable to have the reporter of the bill come talk about the need for the bill, because Ledge Council can't do that. So, you know, if it's really clear to them, spend a couple minutes telling us the impetus for this bill before Ledge Council walks through it. I think that's still in order.
Yeah, I think that's a good direction to give to people, because I think oftentimes they think they're going through their report that they did on the floor.
Yeah, I agree. I think we just need them to give a broad overview of why they did it and what the intention was.
Yeah, good. Okay.
But I think Jason has some show and tell for us, because he went running upstairs, I think, to get something to show us.
I still don't have it yet, but I was hoping to find it, but I know I have it squirreled away. I will send it to Gail, but it is going to just be the listing of Vermont products, and you will see the cost that LexisNexis chooses. They actually have a little catalog for every state that they sell their products within, and they have Vermont, of course, at the end, and you will see how much they charge.
Okay, so I would suggest that we have Becky come in sometime, maybe next week or the week after that, and look at this again.
Yeah.
Agreed.
This is bigger than we thought. And yes, because one of our questions for Becky before you joined, Jeanette, was when is the contract up for renewal? Because, you know, we can always change a contract.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Senator Polina.
My pleasure, Madam Chair.
Did a great job.
You did a great job.
Seems like we all got pretty confused there for a while.
But thank you, Tom and
the
Jason.
good news is Tucker was paying attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, the senator did it was a spirited conversation, as you can see. It's what you inherited.
It was very interesting. And I'm going to offer to report this bill, if I may, Madam Chair.
If we ever get it passed.
Without objection.
Well, exactly. Well, there may be competition for it now.
It's true.
So
speaking law school bond is,
speaking of reporting bills, I have to say, Senator Collmore, you did a fantastic job this morning on H10.
I agree.
Well, to be perfectly honest, those were John Gannon's floor notes from the other body. So
really? What?
All I did was read them.
Well, you did a great job, and you read them as if they were your own. So,
well, I mean, I believe them.
Yeah.
It was. And Tucker helped me out quite a bit with the Berrytown Charter section by section.
No, you did a really good job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure
So-
that Lee Burger's happy.
Should we move on to H 154?
Sure.
Tucker, is that you?
That is me. And I think that it should be a relatively quick walkthrough, if not a robust conversation afterwards. So H154 amends 24 VSA section 961, which provides the terms and procedures for vacancy or suspension of an officer's duties. Subsections A and B are technically corrected generally throughout those subsections. So those are the first changes that you see. At the end of page 1, you'll see that new language is added in subsection D that states that when a municipal officer refuses or neglects within 30 days of election or appointment to take an oath of office pursuant to 24 VSA section 831, that the office shall become vacant. We now have a saving clause. However, the office shall not be deemed vacant until the legislative body of the municipality has warned a regular meeting for that purpose and affords the municipal officer the opportunity to take the oath of office at the meeting. So essentially, subsection D establishes that if an officer is elected, they have 30 days to take their oath of office and assume the position. If they fail or neglect to take that oath of office and take the position, the office becomes vacant. The actual procedure under the vacancy statutes for the vacancy being opened is that the select board has to deem the vacancy, right? So here it says that the select board shall not take that step, really, of deeming the vacancy until they have warned a regular meeting and given that officer, whoever it may be, the opportunity to show up at the meeting and take their oath of office. If that doesn't happen, they get to move forward, deem the office vacant, and fill it according to statute.
That's it?
That's the whole bill.
But so I apologize because I don't have the bill right in front of me here. I don't think I have it someplace, but so what did we change?
You added that in the vacancy statute, you added that a position can be deemed vacant if the officer does not take their oath of office. And you should go back through the record in the House and see where this came from, but there is a select board member in Wilmington that never took the oath of office and has never assumed the position on the select board. So they have been operating, from what I understand, with a board of 2. Is that correct, Gwyn? And that is the problem that this, that's the problem that this addresses. If an officer does not show up, take their oath of office, or really conduct anything in the office within 30 days, a vacancy can be deemed and the town can move on and fill the position.
Senator Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that compliment, by the way. I do appreciate that. It's always nice to hear. I think the difference here, if I'm reading the bill correctly, under current law, if someone resigns or dies or is removed, there's already a provision for a vacant position. This would add the situation where someone doesn't even begin by not taking the oath. Is that sort of 25 words or less?
Yes, that is the motion picture preview version. You got it. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Gwen, do you want to, any questions for Tucker? Gwen, do you want to?
Well, actually, can I just ask, just to clarify, this is not part of this bill really, but sometimes to fill that vacancy after the 30 days, they warn the meeting, et cetera, the person doesn't take the oath. some positions, the select board would just replace the person, right? Other times they might have to do another election. But it depends on how they do by statute.
Yes, and this subsection also covers appointed offices. So to the extent that the appointment requires some separate procedure, other statute would cover how it gets filled.
Thanks, that's what I thought.
Gwen?
Thank you, committee. Gwen Zakoff from the League of Cities and Towns. Yeah, so Tucker was correct. This bill came from a situation from Wilmington where a person, as we understand it, was signatures were collected to be have this person on the ballot. That person did not want to be on the ballot, however, won election and refused to take the oath. And by refusal, meaning never came in and never took any steps, despite best efforts by the other folks in town and the town manager to coax this person to take an affirmative step. So this is a really rare, very narrow solution for a very hopefully rare problem. Asking around, I hadn't found any, at least in recent history, any instances where this has happened before, but the only solution really now to fill in a vacancy, if it doesn't meet that vacancy requirement under statute, would be to go to court to ask for the court to intervene, which is a very long and very expensive process. So hopefully this language will be useful in those few instances where it's necessary. Initially, it was kind of broad language. We had VLCT was a little nervous with the original language where it was failure basically to take an oath, where, you know, just if someone in any office, and mind you, there are plenty of municipal officers that require an oath for office, where, you know, some of the even boards, they don't meet more than once a month, if that, where, you know, if they were, I think it was a week, wasn't it, Tucker, initially, if they didn't take an oath within a week, that made us really, really nervous when you have so many officials that might be impacted. But I think now the language we fully support, because it's much more narrow, it's much more precise, it still has that 30-day window, there has to be affirmative action, so it gives the ability for the person in question to at least plead their case, essentially, if they want to step in. So we support the bill. We think it's necessary in the few, hopefully, instances that it arises moving forward.
Senator Calmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just out of curiosity, Gwen, what position was it in the case of Wilmington?
It was a select board, and I think that's probably why it was such a big deal, is because that's, you know, it might not be as much of an issue for, you know, another official, but certainly for a select board member, particularly on a board of 3.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
If we would let you have any number of board members, this probably wouldn't happen, but so it is, and it actually is more than 30 days, because then they have to, after the 30 days, they have to warn a meeting, and how they have to warn a meeting for a special meeting for at least 7 days, because it isn't an emergency. So you're talking about a long time. Yeah. Okay. Any questions about this? So here's the question that I have, if this will muck this up or not. Should we think about putting the issue of the school board vacancy on here? It is related. It is a vacancy in a position, and we would have to have the school board association. We talked about having the school board association and some people come in and talk to us about that issue anyway. But it seems to me that if we want to do something about that this is where it would belong.
I think it's a good idea.
It's probably a good idea, assuming that we're going to come up with what we're going to agree on what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, we may not agree on what needs to be done, and it may be something that we just leave to the education committee, but we can, if we take some testimony and can agree and can talk to them, maybe this would be the vehicle.
Right, I agree.
Madam Chair, could Tucker remind us what current law is regarding filling a school board I'm confused. I know it was select board, then it was the school board, then it was the select board. I don't know where we are anymore. Please, Tucker.
Tucker?
I am actually not certain about what Title 16 says about school board vacancies, so I don't have a good answer for you. I can tell you that it's probably just as complicated as other municipal law, and that Title 16 will likely have a generally applicable vacancy statute, but then there are chartered school districts, and then there are merged school districts that are operating under temporary provisions. So I will reach out to my counterpart in education and get you an answer, Senator Collmore.
Well, I appreciate that. So we could be opening up literally a can of spaghetti here. It sounds like anyway.
I think this was just around a unified district.
It was a
Where-
merged district, yeah.
Yeah, where they had, where in the past, so, and it would only be for those districts where the representative from the town is voted on by the town. It wouldn't be for at-large
Right.
representatives on the unified district board. It would be just, I mean, I think it's Clarendon, Wallingford, isn't that the issue here?
Yeah, Shrewsbury, Clarendon, Wallingford, and
Tinmouth.
Tinmouth. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we should have somebody come in and talk to us about that and see if this, if there's any agreement, and we should put this on here. But in terms of this bill itself, where are we?
Oh, I don't have a problem voting for it. Come on.
Okay.
I would support this. This seems like a clean solution.
Mhm. Okay, all right. So we will, and it is an H bill, so we don't have to get it, I mean, although they would probably like us to do this pretty soon in Wilmington.
I can't speak for Wilmington, but as I understand it, there was a resolution that was made with their town attorney to some regard, but I would reach out perhaps to a representative from Wilmington just to be 100%.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll do that. So where are we, committee? Look, we're only 6 minutes behind ourselves.
Behind ourselves.
How did you do in education?
Well, do you know what the issue is here? It's Brian, Senator Collmore, you know what the issue is. In 2018, the boards and the Sunset Advisory Committee took testimony on the State Board of Education.
Oh.
And they were such a mess that we decided to eliminate them, knowing that that would spur the legislature to do something. So we did it, and the House took it off, because it always starts as a House bill. The House took it off and gave it to their Education Committee to address. They didn't address it in the 2019 or 2020 session, but in the 2019 and 2020 session, the Senate Education worked with the State Board and the agency to come up with a new statute around the State Board of Education. It really was a very good bill, and it passed the Senate. So then the House didn't take that bill up either. So last summer, the Sunset Advisory Committee put S-166, the Senate Education Bill, onto the Sunset Advisory Committee bill. And once again, the House took it off and instead decided that House Education decided that they were going to set up a summer study committee to look at. So this has been 3 years now, and they're going to set up a summer study committee. So our question was, should we put it back on the boards and the H-122? But only certain, and John Carroll is talking to them now about certain sections that should really need to be dealt with around the State Board of Education and their rules, because according to him, the past boards have used they have broad authority in the statutes to do rulemaking that is almost often contrary to state law and to what the agency would have them do. And they've used that authority. And he thinks it's important for them to straighten that out sooner rather than later. So that's what it was. So they're going to take that up and decide what they should do, and then we'll do what they decide we should do, I think. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay. So we are going on to S95. Government Accountability Committee. And this is S95 was changing the two of the outcomes and then asking for some disaggregation of information around race and ethnicity and gender in some instances. So where Senator Clarkson.
Do we have new appointees to GAC?
What?
Do we have new appointees to GAC? The Government Accountability Committee in the Senate?
It's Brian, Keisha, myself, and
was it Andy Perchlik?
That's what I thought.
Oh, yes, I think you're right. Yes.
Andy. Yeah.
Right. So you're carrying our water is all I'm trying to, I couldn't remember who had, right. Great. Thank you.
Drew Rosselli will be joining us at 3:15. So in about 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So we walked through, and Drew and Sue walked through, and what this bill does is makes those that one change to the outcomes. It changes, it combines the, I can't think of what, I have it here. Sorry, I'm so disorganized today. I've just had, it combines the two outcomes that specifically dealt with elders living in places where they wanted to, and people with disabilities living in places where they wanted to. And the problem there was that it was two group specific, and it should be a population outcome. Is that right, Brian? Brian is the chair of Government Accountability. So
yes, Madam Chair, that is correct. We had a subgroup, which was I remember Emily Kornheiser and Jessica
Brumstead,
and I think Drew and maybe Sue and maybe Coach. There were 5 people, I think, on it. And they came up with the recommendation that, and if you want to look at S95, it's on our web page.
Yeah.
And Senator White's correct. What it did was population, or the outcome number 7 used to say Vermont's elders live with dignity and in settings they prefer. And outcome 8 said Vermonters with disabilities live with dignity and settings they prefer. So all we did was combine 7 and 8 to delete the reference of elders and disabilities and just say Vermonters should live in settings they prefer. And then the rest of the change is just renumbering the outcomes so that we end up now with 9 instead of 10. That's all this bill does, basically. Everything else is current law.
Right, and the indicators, in desegregating the indicators, that isn't in statute. That
no.
Those are done by the Government Accountability Committee. I mean, that's where it comes from, but it doesn't require a statutory change. So that's all this bill does.
Yeah. So we did that work over the summer. Basically, we met, we had public hearing, and then we came together again about 6 weeks ago, maybe. I can't remember exactly. I think it was right before the session began. So actually it might be more like 9 weeks ago. And we went through the indicators, which sit underneath the outcomes. Indicators are more specific things which directly relate to how the outcome fits in. And we finished our work there, and the chief performance officer has already hopefully done her job, because I think by the date in March that she had to get that done. So all this bill does is what Senator White and I have indicated it does. It renumbers, it kind of loses one of the outcomes by combining two groups into just Vermonters, and then renumbers the outcome. So we now have 9 instead of 10.
And under that one outcome that's combined now, there can be indicators for specific populations. I mean, there could be, because that's where indicators come in, is to support the outcomes. So are there questions about this, or?
So it's not really a question about what's in it, but what is not in it, which is getting the ball rolling on a kind of public process around indicators so that the public can weigh in on any changes.
You know, I've been thinking about that, and I think that I'm not sure how we do that, because this is really kind of almost an operational administrative kind. The indicators are what we look for in order to support the, like, all Vermonters should, I can't remember, there's one around employment. And so you look at specific indicators to figure out if you're going in the right direction there or the wrong direction. And I'm not sure how, I've been trying to imagine how the public looks at indicators that are primarily administrative. I don't know. I don't know what anybody would have to say about indicators. That's all.
I mean, I feel like it's a disservice to call them administrative. If they are in, quality of life outcomes that we hope are, in mind for everything we do in the state, I would hope they're more aspirational than administrative. And if that's the case, the state deserves to weigh in on our North Star. If we're saying these are the things we're going to measure to know if we're serving Vermonters, that feels like a very public issue to me.
And it can be, and I didn't mean to say that it was just administrative. It just, so there are 45 indicators approximately. And I don't know how I've been trying to figure out how you engage the public around those 45 indicators. I mean, if you had how do you, that's the issue that I'm having here. And this has nothing to do with the bill itself. The bill itself just changes those two things. So I think that I'd like to separate the two conversations, because the bill itself is just changing the two outcomes.
I was saying I thought there would be a public process around the outcome. And I think you have to have a public process around the outcomes in order to decide the indicators.
So you
around these outcomes. So I don't know that it's fair to then say we're ready to decide exactly what indicators we should have.
No. That I guess I'm confused here now. So you're suggesting that we have a public hearing around what our 10 outcomes should be?
I'm not suggesting a public hearing. I'm suggesting paying for a community process, something that's much more common in other states, where you actually consult with someone to engage around the state about if these outcomes are in line with what Vermonters think we should be measuring against to determine if we are accurately articulating the quality of life they hope to enjoy in the state. I don't even know where, I mean, I've heard from the history that these just sort of appeared. Like,
No.
When did the public get to weigh in on these?
Oh, we had tons and tons of committee meetings, and I can remember in room 10 having many people involved in the conversations. And we had these outcomes, maybe this was, I don't know. I mean, the outcomes were decided a long time, a few years ago.
Didn't you have with Diane Snelling? Don't I remember lots of hearing?
Well, I hope we've evolved from believing that who can come to the State House and advocate in the State House is the same as public engagement around such important outcome.
All right, so I guess I'm confused here about, and maybe Drew can help me here, are we talking about changing our outcomes? Is that what we're talking about here? Is having people weigh in on the 10 outcome or the 9 outcomes that we have and making changes to the outcomes themselves? Is that what we're talking about?
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm sorry for joining a little bit late, but
no,
always
that's
glad
okay.
to be part of this conversation.
We just started.
So Drew Wesley, I'm the Director of Performance Improvement at the Agency of Human Services. In 2010, I believe, which is before I was involved, there was some work to establish outcomes of well-being. And then and I can't speak to the process for that, but then in 2014, the Government Accountability Committee solicited stakeholder engagement around developing, sort of reestablishing outcomes of well-being in statute. And I can't speak to sort of the history of why that was necessary, except that we started to see more of a saturation across the state in the nonprofit sector and in the state sector in using results-based accountability. And so there was a willingness and an openness among sort of that sector to re-engage this conversation. And it extended across state government to include representatives from other state agencies and departments outside of the health and human services world. I do think, to Senator Rahm's comment, it was a quite limited stakeholder engagement ultimately in terms of how we were thinking about, I'll just pause there and say that I think in front of us now, to your point, Senator White, is an opportunity in S95 to adjust outcome language, which I do not think is an appropriate approach to changing outcomes. I think a stakeholder engagement process to revisit outcomes is how we should seek to change them. And my understanding is that the recommendation around changing outcome language that we've seen in this statute just came from a small group conversation, a small working group conversation out of the Government Accountability Committee, and was more of a brainstorm than it was really ultimately a recommendation to be put in statute. And so we have recommended in the Government Accountability Report that, or in the memo that Sue Zeller, Chief Performance Officer, sent to the Government Accountability Committee, that we do engage a robust stakeholder engagement process over the summer that could facilitate revisiting indicators through an equity lens and through deep relationship building in communities of color. And it could include, that would be the appropriate place to include a conversation about outcomes. So I hope that clarifies something and doesn't further confuse.
It doesn't. For me, I guess my question is, when you engage, first of all, I will say, Senator Rahm, I'm not sure that we are in a position to ask for funding to do this. To hire somebody to actually do this. I am very aware of budgetary issues, and that we're asking for, anyway, that's just a personal feeling of mine, that I'm not sure that this is something that I am not sure if we could support hiring consultants to go out and do this engagement. But my concern is how you do this around outcomes and indicators. And I mean, first of all, it took just the legislature a bazillion years to understand the difference between outcomes and indicators and what they mean. And I don't know how you, anyway, I'm really struggling with this one. Yeah, Drew.
I just want to jump back in because I can understand where you're coming from. I think that there's a different use and understanding of outcomes and indicators that seems like it's landed in the legislature than in communities. So I want to just clarify that there are many, almost every, I think, nonprofit organization in Vermont now has some familiarity with results-based accountability, given changes that have been made in grant funding, et cetera, over the years. Lots of training that has been done. And I actually think that there's sort of a high degree of awareness of how to use indicator data in planning that allows for you to write a grant application or to bring funding in. So there's actually, I think, already readiness in communities across the state and in sectors to have this type of conversation. And it's typical that you would facilitate a results-based accountability exercise to establish indicators by starting with outcomes. So it would actually be atypical for us to host a stakeholder engagement meeting around indicators that didn't revisit the outcomes, but we had suggested that it would be possible if there was not openness in the state, in the legislature, for revisiting the outcomes. You could have a conversation about indicators without revisiting the outcomes, but it would certainly be appropriate and advised that you would have the outcome conversation and then the indicator conversation. And I think what ultimately could happen is that the Government Accountability Committee promote those however they're facilitated, whether it's state employees who facilitate it or legislators who facilitate it or a paid consultant. Those conversations could be facilitated in a planned way. Recommendations could be surfaced to the Government Accountability Committee, and the Government Accountability Committee could recommend a change to statute like S95 had done, and then has the capacity and the ability to change indicators without statute. So that's how those recommendations could be filtered through back to you.
Yeah, so any other people weigh in here, because I really am struggling with this, because when I think about a public engagement, I don't think about necessarily about working with groups of nonprofits, people who are organized and stuff. I think about the public, the Joe Schmo down the street, and how he weighs in on what an outcome is, and so I struggle with that in terms of how you come to any consensus around some outcomes when you have 620,000 people who have a different idea of what. So anyway, that I am struggling with this one. So Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I share your struggle. It took me, I think I've been on GAC for probably, this is the third term, so going on 5 years. And it took me half of that time to even understand what the difference was between an outcome and an indicator. So I'm not sure that, and I don't know that there's an average Vermonter, but if you spoke to a bunch of average Vermonters, I'm not sure how much information or useful kind of input they could give to an outcome. If you look at the outcomes, they're all designed as very aspirational goals. It's, well, let me read them. So,
apple pie and mom.
Yeah. Vermont has a prosperous economy. Vermonters are healthy. Vermont's environment is clean and sustainable. Vermont's a safe and welcoming place to live. Vermont's families are safe, nurturing, stable, and supported. I mean, Vermont has open, effective, and inclusive government. Those are all pretty wide 80,000 foot views of what we all would like to see. I don't know what else you could add. I guess I'm having trouble coming up with another outcome that we don't sort of already have, and the indicators can go down as deeply as you want under each outcome, but I don't know what's the next outcome going to be. I have no idea. And it has to be one that takes into account all Vermonters, or it really isn't very useful. So I know what Senator White's trying to say. I probably didn't even come close to saying it as well as she did, but I'm just sort of not understanding, I guess, what we're going to do. And then secondly, what do we do with S95? Just put it on the shelf until the summer, or I don't know.
We can do that. So Senator Rahm, when you help me understand here, what, in terms of the outcomes, what would be an outcome that would be a different kind of an outcome, or a different, I guess, not an indicator, but an outcome?
Let's take the example of what's happening right now. Vermonters feel included and engaged in their government to help, and they feel their voices are heard. You know, right now, what we're talking about is how transparent and, inclusive are we in how we articulate our own values as a state. That is what is at stake right now, is that if these are important to us at all, if there's something we use to hold government accountable, then people deserve to buy in and weigh in before these are this is the moral compass for the state of what constitutes quality of life for Vermonters.
But what you've just described sounds like to me outcome number 8.
Right. And then it is outcome number 8.
Read an outcome number 8, if you will.
Okay. Vermont has open, effective, and inclusive government.
So then what you have to do is look at the indicators under there. That's an aspirational, that's we're saying the same thing that you just said, that is the goal. So how do we measure
inclusive if people have not really had a chance to participate in the creation of these outcomes?
Drew has a.
Drew.
There's just a couple things I want to name. First of all, I think you were totally correct, Senator White, to call me on my defaulting to nonprofits and organizations as those who would participate in a stakeholder engagement process. I want to just remind you that results-based accountability is not just like a framework that has jargony language that we can use, but it's also a tool that has facilitated community members who are not professionalized over decades now to participate in conversations about building a common agenda in a community for thriving and well-being, and not just in, and usually not in, predominantly white settings. And so results-based accountability has been used through an equity lens to ensure that the voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color living in communities are creating the common agenda and are represented in it. And so, like right now, Act 186 outcomes and indicators have the opportunity to be better reflecting the reality of inequities and disparities and disproportionate engagement with our systems. And Act 186 is not currently doing that based on the indicators that are included in it. We don't have deep insight into how the experience of BIPOC Vermonters is different than the experience of white Vermonters in the current report. The outcomes, every outcome should be for all Vermonters. That's how it should be. And that's why we wanted to make some of the changes that are reflected in S95. And I think that we could see outcome language enhanced through a community process that would help ensure that the voices of all Vermonters have been involved in the construction of that language. We may not see them very different. Like we may see recommendations that look pretty similar to what we have now, but it would have been a valuable process. The indicators, I think we would see substantially change through that process. And it is a headache to imagine all the vetting that would need to happen, but we're extremely well versed in how to do that. This is how we do community health assessments. This is how we create any set of recommendations, including what the Racial Equity Task Force has just produced. So we're skilled in how to refine what is a broad array of recommendations into a few. But what we have not done is convened a robust enough community stakeholder engagement process to say that Act 186 actually does reflect a common agenda for Vermont. And I think that's what I'm hearing is a little bit of concern about what that process would actually look like, which I understand, but also want to just reiterate we have done many times before. That is, in a lot of cases, the business of the executive branch is to do that type of work. So I wanted to just name all of that.
So where do we go from here? I'm still a little confused about how we do it. And I understand that, and I do get that the indicators might change, and that doesn't require legislation at all. So those indicators can change, and how we measure them and how we desegregate them or disaggregate them, I guess is the word, can change. I'm still a little confused about how we go about having the robust community engagement. And part of my concern is that we did have a public hearing on the indicators and on the outcomes, and only 4 people showed up. I mean, it was broadly advertised, and so I'm concerned that how we go about doing this and how we do it effectively. And so Allison and Anthony, you've been very quiet.
Well, I served on the GAC for a couple of years as well. So I am very sympathetic to what you're going through, Jeanette, because it was difficult to conform the language, to learn the language that we ended up working with. And I think that when you think about it through that lens of, indicators, outcomes, et cetera, using that language, it does seem kind of like uninteresting in some ways. But I don't think that should necessarily stop us from going through some kind of public process like Keisha's talking about. Mm-hmm. And I think that, one way to look at it would be to say, we've got these outcomes and we're taking it out on the road to see how well we're doing with these outcomes. Let's talk to Vermonters about whether we're actually achieving our goals or not. And I think that, with all due respect, Jeanette, Senator Chairman White, it's not your worry as to whether or not people show up or not. That's Drew's worry. You know what I mean? Because I don't think it has to come down to like this committee or the GAC committee, like worrying about the turnout. I think that it's up to people to turn out, and it's up to those people who are used to doing these kinds of, not events, I wouldn't call them events, but well, for lack of a better word, these kinds of events, to make sure that people turn out and get some heads together and figure out the best way to approach it. So I understand the difficulty that you're having with it, because when I was on the GAC, I felt the same way. I was like, nobody's going to understand what we're trying to do here. But I think that there has been a lot of changed thought about government about results-based budgeting and whatnot. And I think that part of what we have to do as a committee, this committee right here, government operations, is be willing to let go of it to some degree. Mm-hmm. And say, all right, here's a group of people let's form a group of people who want to find a way to bring this on the road and talk to people about it. I don't think we have to figure that out, is what I'm saying. And I think that, you could just let it happen. So I guess between Keisha and Drew, I think, I'm not saying they're the only ones, but I think they both are heading in the right direction.
Well, I think it is the Government Accountability Committee, though, that has to take responsibility for this. I think that is where this lies. It is not one person or 2 people. And if we're saying that we should hand this off to the administration to do, that's fine with me. But I think it's the Government Accountability Committee that is made up of 8 people that needs to take responsibility for doing this. Not this committee.
Right. I'm not so sure though. I'm not arguing, but I'm not so sure that it's up to the GAC to actually like take the roadshow out. I don't know if it's up to the GAC to be involved and be a part of the process, but I mean, I'm just not sure it's up to the GAC to be the ones who stand in front of a room full of people and say, this is what's going to happen tonight. I just think that there's people who may be better equipped because they're a little bit outside the process to do that better.
Allison?
So I actually think that this is a perfect time to go and get the temperature of the state and to do public outreach by GAC. I think it's absolutely the committee's jurisdiction to go out and engage with we are looking at all sorts of systemic aspects that affect our well-being. And I think this is a perfect public opportunity to reach out and listen to the state about these big outcomes. And where do we want to be? How do we want to be? How do we want people? How do we accomplish these things? But first and foremost, what do we want for Vermont and for Vermonters? And it's no one community. It's rural Vermont. It's urban Vermont. It's BIPOC. It's seventh generation. It's everybody. It isn't any one group. And I think a public engagement opportunity it's perfect timing now. We're in the process of doing all this other work, looking at ourselves. And this is we began this work in 2010. It's 2021. I think it's a great opportunity for in a very proactive way to take this to Vermonters and say, these are our outcomes at the moment. What do we want for the next 10 years? 10 years, 10 or 11, it's a perfect timing. And I think given all we've done with systemic racism and looking at ourselves, this is a key piece of looking at ourselves and should inform so much of what we do and keeping ourselves on track. How does this make people happier? How does this make people financially more sustainable? How do we keep our communities healthy? And I think actually GAC partnering with the Center on Rural Innovation might be a great partnership. And I think actually this is kind of exciting and a really rich opportunity for GAC. Sorry.
Brian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm still struggling with a couple things. And I'm not necessarily against, I don't know that I want to do a road tour, but you can do a Zoom road tour from anywhere.
I forgot about that actually.
But my fear is that if we do one or two of these, most of the people who come are going to not be able to distinguish between an indicator and an outcome. And we're going to spend all of the time trying to separate them because someone's going to say, well, nobody's listening to me because that doesn't really have anything to do with an outcome. That's more of an indicator. Okay, so that's one of my fears is that, again, I think most people in the other world don't understand the difference and are going to come prepared to offer suggestions about specific programs and specific measurements about an indicator. The other issue is I still don't understand if somebody can give me an example of an outcome right now that is not covered in the 9 that we have, or that we couldn't plug in a whole bunch of indicators to show whether that outcome was being properly enhanced.
Well, you might get confirmation that they're great. I mean, you might get confirmation that for the next 10 years, these are great outcomes.
Well, okay, but
it's every 10 years to get sort of public affirmation of those. Either it confirms it or it also maybe, and I think you can frame it as and provide the clarity for people by providing a document that clarifies all that on the difference between outcomes, indicators, and everything else. Sorry.
Okay.
So I'm perfectly happy to let S95 just sit. I don't know about you, Brian. That was, we were told to do this.
we're certainly not going to figure it out today.
And have this conversation, I think, in the Government Accountability Committee first meeting this summer, and have the conversation and say, where do we go? How do we do this? And you're chair, so you can set that conversation, you and Maida, and kind of have the conversation with the committee members and say, how do we do this? Do we work with the Center for Rural Vermont? Do we work with, do we do a road show? Do we have Drew be the facilitator for the road show? Do we have, I mean, but I think it is a conversation that the GAC needs to have. It's not this committee's conversation, even though there are 3 of us from this committee on GAC. It's GAC, it's not this. We're involved here only because of S95.
I agree, Madam Chair, and I think Sue Zeller needs to be involved too, because she's the one that puts together the dashboards and all that stuff for people to look at to say, okay, do more people smoke than we want? Let's take a look, and we can quickly see that. Or are Vermonters getting more obese? There's a way to find out. You know, it's those kind of indicators that, to me, always tell the story. The outcomes are sort of like, oh, I wish that this would happen, and it'd be really nice if it could. And you could keep going, I guess, about that. But the real test is whether the population level indicators are doing their job.
Keisha?
So my sense has always been that nothing needs to happen legislatively for agencies to disaggregate data by demographic so that we have better information. What I am curious about is if they need funding to feel like they can do that appropriately. And that feels like the jurisdiction of this committee to know if we are getting a huge infusion of one-time dollars to improve people's lives and help get people back to some sense of normalcy. Well, what is that? And how do people define it? And who is left behind in that? And we're not going to know any of that information unless state government feels equipped to collect the data that it needs to answer those questions. So that's what I'm saying feels missing from this is I don't know if state government is ready to disaggregate this data and ask these critical questions. That's why I introduced a state planning office bill. But you know, I just don't know whose job that is to collect better data in the state.
Drew had her hand up.
I would just, in recognition that I think Senator White's statement was useful in terms of closure and where the next conversation lives, I agree that the Government Accountability Committee does have responsibility for shepherding the process, even if they bring others in to help facilitate it. And I do think that S95 at this point, it makes sense to me that it be sort of shelved until we can say that we have community input. And then to Senator Rahm's point, I think that state agencies and departments, I can only speak for the Agency of Human Services, obviously, are undergoing some internal explorations to figure out what is our data collection capacity right now related to data about race and ethnicity and also English language learners. And to what extent do we feel confident in our own data and the data that we're collecting from our community partners? And that is a conversation that's filled with oftentimes more questions than answers, but is still happening and I think would be useful for you to explore. In Act 186, the outcomes of well-being legislation, we are more often than not looking at whole population level measures, which have more to do with data that we can get from national surveys, more often than our own programs and services. But it might be worthwhile to ask the Government Accountability Committee to do an assessment of the data sources that are currently included in Act 186 and which of those are disaggregatable now by race, which is what I understand Sue Zeller to be directing the executive branch to do for the next Act 186 report.
And I do want us to think beyond disaggregating by race, because we have real urban-rural divides here, and we need to address that as well. This should not just be about race. This should be about our whole populations and how all of Vermonters are faring.
I think
Absolutely.
sort of,
Keisha?
well, layered on top of that, I mean, we should have a standard way that we are constantly slicing and disaggregating data to the extent possible. And it should include a lot of values about what information we feel we need so that people don't get left behind. It's demographic information, it's your family size, it's your income, it's your geography, your access to the internet. I mean, you know, these are all really critical ways to understand how Vermonters are able to access the economy, access education, access opportunity. So that's where I would like to live on the Government Accountability Committee, is how do we make sure that the way we ask for information is standardized and well supported to know at this level where we are that we're not leaving populations behind.
And I think that has more to do with the indicators than with the outcomes. That is okay, so I'm going to suggest that we put S95, get out your push pin, Gail, and stick it on the board for the time being, and that the Government Accountability Committee, under the leadership of Senator Collmore, have this conversation at its first meeting along with Sue and Drew, and maybe a couple other people who can help us think broader. And I don't know who those are, and I'll leave that up to Senator Collmore to work with Drew and Sue and Keisha and whoever to come up with that conversation.
But you've got lots of resources who think big. You know, you've got Paul Costello, you've got Matt Dunn, you've got Paul Costello, you've got lots, and all that research arm at the UVM. I mean, you've got lots of people who can help us think big about this.
Yep.
If I could just say, I think with the one-time money, I know we don't want to talk about appropriations, but we're getting a lot of one-time money, and it would set up state government so well if we set up data systems that continue, not like, oh, hey, last time we had a crisis, we gathered this information for a year and learned, wow, we've really left certain populations behind with vaccination or infection rate. You know, we have to consistently collect data over time, and we're not very good at that. And if out of this ongoing pandemic, we collect standardized data in the state and have systems to analyze it, collect it, share it, that are improved and agreed upon, I think that's an incredible outcome for Vermonters from this crisis.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Drew.